Hi, I'm Ali.
And I'm Penny, and you're listening to Not Too Busy to Write,
The podcast about writing, publishing and creativity amongst life's many other demands.
I'm joined today by Doreen Cunningham, who's been a BBC journalist for the past 20 years. Doreen originally studied engineering and briefly worked in climate-related research before turning to journalism. Her memoir, Soundings, Journeys in the Companies of Wales, is out on March 3rd. Welcome, Doreen.
Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
It's so nice to be here and chatting to you about your book. Full disclosure to all the listeners, Doreen and I are old friends, and I feel like I know this book quite well now because we've slightly been on this writing journey together, haven't we?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Well, first of all, let's talk about your book. It tells the story of your journeys as a single mother with a very young child after a really traumatic time, leaving a relationship and having to fight for custody for your son. And you threw caution to the wind and followed the grey whale migration from Mexico to Alaska. And amongst that, we also hear about the journey that you had before becoming a parent, when you spent 3 months living with an Inupiat family in northern Alaska, learning about how Indigenous communities have been predicting climate change. It is just a book of so many angles and facets, so hard to describe. It's a memoir, it's about motherhood, it's about climate change, it's about nature, it's about love, it's about so many things. I guess I wanted to start by asking, did you know right from the beginning that you were going to intertwine those two major journeys together into the one story?
I guess so, because when I started writing, I was writing bits of both. In fact, I think I started with the Arctic because some of the major characters, or one of the major character, died, and I started to write more about them. And then I always knew that the structure was going to be the grey whale journey, because it's such an obvious structure for a book, right? I think until I had done that and looked back on it, I had never thought of really writing a book, but it was just such an obvious book to write in a way. But the main thing was the family in the Arctic who'd taken me in, and how much they'd taught me and what I had gained from that experience. That's sort of the heart of it. But then kind of, as you described, everything is the heart of it. It's like a real combination of different things. So I guess I did, but I hadn't worked out how.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I loved how the two journeys merged together. For me, like as a reader, it made perfect sense that you would tell the story that way. Because as you say, the journey that you took with your young son, and he was around 2 at the time, right? When you did this.
He was 2, yes.
He was 2. And it is so beautifully described. And there was so much that I resonated with what I was reading about your experience. Not because I ever did anything like that as a parent of a young child, but because so much of what you were feeling and what went into the way you described how you were feeling as a new mother resonated so much with me. This idea of, I think you describe at one point, just before that you got pregnant with your son, you had been confronting Al Gore in like a parking lot, trying to get information from him, and in an interview that nobody else could get. And you were interviewing people in conflict zones, and you were this very gung-ho, really fierce journalist. And suddenly, as a mother, you had so much taken away, and you had to kind of rebuild yourself and reinvent yourself. And that's something I resonated so much with in the book. And this idea that you felt so judged for doing something which seemed to perhaps outsiders like a crazy thing to do, taking a very young child on this massive journey.
Yes, well, I did feel a bit judged, but I hadn't, at the time, I did not realise how crazy it was, because of my background in journalism and because I love to move around. I fall in love with everywhere I go. I find it very difficult to be stuck in the same place. I don't like being within 4 walls. I love meeting new people and talking to them. I just love being on the road. And so it was where I felt comfortable. It was always where I felt most at home. You know, I was a bit of a wanderer as a child as well, which comes into the book. And I love to be outside. And so it was the most natural place for me to be. But then I did get comments about the kind of people would just say, well, he's not going to remember it anyway. He's only 2. Wait till he's older. But then the other people would say, oh, I'm a bit concerned. But there was nothing that was going to stop me, because really what drove the journey was an overpowering urge to get back to the Arctic and to that feeling that I had had there. So it was in a way unconscious. And I did not realize how unusual it was until much later, when I thought, oh my God, I did that.
But also, he's clearly thriving on this journey. Like he's, it's so obvious that he is having quite an amazing experience and learning so much.
Best time. We had the best time, and it's still very strong for us, I think. We refer to it a lot, and it's always this thing that we have done together. And in the moment of it, I mean, looking back, I took a lot of footage of both journeys, actually, and listening back to some of the grey whale stuff, I do sound very tired. On those train journeys, I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah. And I was like, right, okay, yeah, that must have been hard, but those aren't the bits you remember. Although, of course, I do write about being very tired at different points in the book. But I would have been very tired at home,
Yes.
It's more exhausting being at home with a young child for me. And part of the journey is making peace with the kind of mother I'm going to be as well.
There was a part where you talked about kind of wishing in a way that you felt satisfied with being at home and going to the local park, and that you sort of wished in a way that you were that kind of mother, because it felt like life would be a bit easier for you maybe if you were satisfied in that way. And that really resonated with me as well, this idea that sometimes I kind of just wish I didn't want anything different to what is mainstream, because life maybe would be a bit easier if we weren't maybe yearning for quite so much.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, isn't it? And well, yes, that's sort of, then there's an epiphany sort of slightly after that point in the book. But I do have to watch my longing. It's always there. And it's not always appropriate. But in that case, I do think it was a great thing to do with my son.
Yeah. Oh, it was just it's just such an incredible thing to read about. I think particularly, single parents who have very, very strong, intimate relationships with their children, which I think has been my experience of all the single parents that I know that have been the sole parents. Just this idea of the relying so wholly on each other, and it's such a beautiful relationship to read about. But it's certainly not the only relationship in the book, and it was just so incredible to read about your time that you spent in northern Alaska, and the family that really embraced you, and even at one point gave you an Inupiat name, and really brought you forward. And I guess I just wanted to wonder as well about when you decided to write about that. I know that there are some challenges in choosing to write memoir as a white person in a non-white community, an Indigenous community. I guess I wanted to ask you about how did you sort of end up where you ended up with it? Did you ask for support from sensitivity readers, or how did you come to what you decided to put in the book in the end?
I did everything I could think of, because to be quite honest, at the beginning, I wasn't sure this was okay. I desperately wanted to write about what I had gained from that experience in the most respectful and honest way I could think of. And I also kind of felt like I hadn't done justice to the experience, because I think that the hospitality I experienced is very typical, that people often go there and feel completely drawn in and welcomed and supported. So I'm not unusual in that respect. But I also felt like, well, then I wanted to stay, but that wasn't really possible for a variety of reasons. I went away again, and then what did I do with that enormous gift that they had given me? And so I felt like I want to share this I don't want to tell their story. I want to tell my, the bit of the story that is mine, really, what I experienced, and the the love I got there, it was astounding to experience a tiny bit of their lives with them. But yes, I felt an enormous responsibility, and so I'm still in touch with the family. So they knew right from the beginning what I was planning to do. I'm still in touch with them. Um, I asked for feedback from writers of colour where I could hear in my writing community about how I was dealing with race, and I actually wouldn't have had the courage to continue, I don't think, if I hadn't had feedback. Particularly, actually, a very early comment from Diana Evans just on one part of it, which was through the MA that I did at Goldsmiths, where she said something like, "You write really intelligently about race, and more white people should do that." And then that kind of freed me. I thought, okay, I'm going to have a go. And a member of the family read everything I had written about them and spoke to another really important member of the family for me. So that was done. Then I also tracked down someone from the community who I didn't know. And this was actually really difficult to do. It took a long time and a lot of approaches, who had the time to read for me without being kind of distracted by their relationship with me.
Yeah, so somebody who wasn't personally involved in the story,
who could have been really tough on me if they'd wanted to be, sort of thing. And I was totally open to any feedback, and that there wasn't much, but it was really, really useful. In the end, there was something about the relationship between the Inupiaq and the International Whaling Commission that I had it in the book, but they wanted it earlier on. They felt it was really important for the community that this relationship was defined quite early, and I was very easily able to do that. But I would have taken on anything they'd said, really. I came at it from a position of feeling very, very responsible. And then, yes, I also engaged with academic experts here, and one expert is Barbara Bodenhorn, who spent years and years and years living with Inupiaq communities in the Arctic, and I asked for her help with some of the aspects I'd written, particularly the historical aspects, and she gave me really forthright feedback, which was so useful. And I still go into it with a bit of trepidation. I tried my absolute best, and a book is better than the sort of journalism that I was used to doing, where you have very little time to explain anything. There was a bit more time, but again, it was, I couldn't lose the reader with a lot of information and context, but I did as much as I was able to and capable of doing. And then also Professor Hugh Brodie, who's an anthropologist who lived in the Canadian Arctic for decades and decades. It's a very different area, but he was aware very much of all the issues with colonialism and the negative tropes that are used. And those academics were so generous with their time. I've been overwhelmed with gratitude for the help they've given me. So I did everything I could think of, absolutely everything I could think of.
I think the balance is so beautifully done, as well as a non-scientist reading it and a non-historian. I mean, it's just so, the information about the history of the area, the colonialism, the history of whaling itself. It's just so beautifully woven in. There's lots of really important detail. I learned so much, but at the same time, you never feel lost in it. It never feels like a history book. It never feels like a kind of sort of history of Alaska or anything like that. But it's so beautifully drawn together, including and so much that I never knew about Wales and about that region. Some of it completely unsurprising to read very much like a history of colonialism in Australia. It sort of reads almost identically to what happened in Australia, some of that, which was really sad to read, but unsurprising. But it's so horrifying. It's really horrifying what happened there. But it's so beautifully woven in. You can really, I think when it comes together with your story of your experience with that community and how they drew you in and held you, and how much warmth and love there is within that community. It's just so incredible to read about their history when you're getting to know some of the community members at the same time, and it just gives a really sort of, I guess, really complete kind of context for your experience there, because it's not your experience that you had with them is not sort of separated out and taken separately. It's sort of given this greater context of what's happened to that community and what might happen in the future going forward as climate change increases in the coming years. So it's just beautifully done. All
Well,
of it
thank
woven
you.
together.
I mean, it was a big challenge because obviously, you know, you can write about your own life more easily. You can access your own memories, but that was, it was a real challenge trying to weave in what I felt absolutely had to be there. Into that. But of course, because when I went there, to be honest, I was very ignorant of the history as well. So it was a learning journey for me. So I try to do that. I try and, you know, and I was given the most beautiful book to read while I was there of Inupiaq stories, which gave a very personal context to the time and the difficulties that had been faced. And so I kind of read that alongside the reader for a bit and try and do it that way.
Yeah. Oh, it's woven together in such a gorgeous, pleasing way, and there's nothing. I guess what I love so much about it is that there's nothing kind of I guess overly romanticized about it either. You have this incredible experience before you become a mother, but when you become a mother, there's just nothing romanticized about your experience as a mother, which I really, really loved. So it's kind of nature writing, I think, at its best, where you bring the reality and the awe of nature together in a really lovely way. But so let's talk about the writing itself, because as you mentioned just a bit earlier, you did a master's at Goldsmiths, and the manuscript was developed partly over that master's, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I started off by doing a course at the Literary Kitchen, which is very useful because you can do it online. It's run by a woman called Andrea Mason, and you have to produce a certain number of words by a certain number of time. And that just helped me get some words out. And so I went to the MA with a lot of words and a lot of sections that have stayed broadly the same, actually, and an attempt at a structure. And then throughout the MA, I kind of worked more on the structure and on dialogue and on the craft, which I had absolutely none of, having only written news stories before. And it was very much done. It was sort of community or I was supported. I had a community around me. I couldn't have done it on my own, and I can't work unless I have a deadline. I just can't make myself do things. I have no self-discipline whatsoever.
Well,
So
I think
that's how I did it.
Every journalist says that. Every journalist who goes on to write a book, I think, that I've ever spoken to has said exactly the same, because you're so used to having these very strict deadlines all the time and somebody on your back, and so it's probably very difficult to function without having that.
Well, I don't see how anyone can do it, because I find it very hard to give myself permission to write. I had no idea that I could write anything worthwhile ever, and I still feel the same way when I face my laptop or even just trying to do a blog post about the book for someone. I'm like, I can't do that. And then when I ask for someone for help, they're like, you've just written a book. Yes, you can, but if I don't have a deadline, I wouldn't feel capable. Somehow the deadline enables me. It's a confidence thing, unfortunately. I wish I didn't have it, but I do.
I just think it's so important to talk about out loud, I think, as well, because I think people think, if you've been a journalist for 20 years, you must have no problems just throwing out the words when necessary and just doing whatever. But still, this idea that you have to sit down and face that self-confidence when you sit down at the laptop to write something new. I think it's really reassuring in a way to hear that that in a way this is just normal. This is really normal, and that even after 20 years of being a writer, you can still experience this.
Right. Yeah, I guess so. It's unfortunate that it's normal, isn't it? But maybe it is different for some people. I don't know.
Perhaps it is. It does feel like something that comes up quite a lot.
Okay.
But also, you when you were doing your masters and you're working on the manuscript, you're also a single parent with more children now, not just the one that accompanies you on this wonderful journey in the book. And so let's talk about that for a second, because as a single parent, I know how difficult this is, this idea of, like you said, giving yourself permission to work on something, and something that wasn't necessarily going to pay you right away, or potentially it wasn't going to pay you at all, and when it did pay you, you didn't know how much it was going to be. And this idea of juggling that and your children and work and keeping a roof over your head, talk to me a little bit about what that was like at the time.
Oh dear. Well, that's been interesting. I guess I should just say that it wasn't that I wanted to write this book. I felt I had to. With the future that we're looking at from the perspective of a mother, when I saw that this book could potentially carry climate in an accessible way, because of that journey I'd done being such an obvious structure, and because of the astounding time I'd had in Utjarvik before becoming a mum, as soon as I saw that that was a possibility, and the fact that I do understand science and I have spent 20 years learning how to make it very accessible, and I have the confidence to approach researchers, it was just like, well, you have to do this then. There's no two ways about it, and you have to do it as soon as possible for your own peace of mind. So it was very much an effort with my children in mind, and it was that I had to do it. Again, not that I wanted to. And so I work very hard when I have to. I'm an extremely hard worker. And I suppose the experience of having lived on very little when Max was young was in a way empowering, because I knew I could do it again. And so we lived on very, very, very little. And I knew about food banks because of my earlier experience, and I accessed food banks. I applied for grants. I had to work out a way of paying the fees for the MA. That wasn't easy. And then I had to support us while I was doing it. And I had to make, actually the most challenging thing, or not the most challenging thing, but the most practically challenging thing was getting there and finding someone who would look after my preschool children while I went, just for one morning a week, because I did it part-time. And I wasn't able to attend any of the out of hours things, and I wasn't able to do any of the reading for it, but I managed to get to that workshop every week and do the creative work around it, and met a community of writers there. But it was a big struggle. Some free childcare becomes available when your child is 2, so that was very helpful. I applied for a grant from the Society of Authors once I had the deal. Once you have a book deal, you can apply for a grant from the Society of Authors. It's I think they asked for income information, and they asked to see the advance and everything, so they can see that you are still really struggling. But before you have a deal, you're on your own. So it's very, very difficult.
It is, yeah. And I think that's so important, though, to mention the Society of Authors, because I think they do offer them.
It's a foundation grant, I think. I'll find the proper name so you can put it online.
I'll pick the links. But, because there are possibilities of getting grants when you're working on a project that's already been commissioned, if your advance isn't very large, which for so many authors, advances aren't very large. So
it was
it's
small.
it's really, really important to mention that, because I'm sure there are people listening who would be able to utilize it themselves as well. But it does just show just how much commitment you need in order to make something like a book happen, in a way, because and I think that's why I think it's so important that we have these conversations openly, because it would be so easy to think that I guess that if, as a writer who doesn't have a big income, or doesn't have a partner with a big income, to, I guess, not give yourself permission to even try. And sometimes we just have to find really, really creative ways of being able to get the work done. And I wish there were a lot more ways to get support, you know, like for instance, a lot more free childcare and all those sorts of things, which we should have, but we don't.
Yeah.
But in a way, there's other ways that we can kind of scrabble together the
It's
help that we
amazing when
need.
you become a mum. You know, when I first became a mum, I couldn't afford to work. I couldn't afford the childcare. And then again, you know, becoming a mother, it's just you can't afford to do anything unless you're on a high income, unless you're on a high wage. So it's very difficult. One thing I think that I tried to keep in mind was Elizabeth Gilbert had written a really lovely, generous book about writing. I can't remember what it's called. I'll find out. But in it, she said you have to treat writing like a love affair. So, first of all, she said don't give up the day job, and of course, I was like, oh, whoops.
Well, when you're a single mother and you can't afford the childcare for your day job, you do sometimes have to put pause on the day job.
Yeah. It was pause though that I knew that, and that's that's coming from a position of privilege in that I had taken a career break, so I knew there was a job at the end, that it was this period when it was going to be very difficult, but eventually when they were all in childcare or at school, I would be able to go to work. So that gave me a lot of psychological security, and I cannot claim to know what it would have felt like without that. There are people who've been far, far worse situations, far more difficult situations than me. But she just said, treat it as a love affair. So, you snatch a kiss on the stairs, you snatch 15 minutes here and there. And that kind of freed me up. I did sometimes just write texts to myself on the phone when I was on the bus. And just snatching bits, learning to do that really helped.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I treat writing in the same way. This idea that I've got to kind of, I guess, follow my passion a little bit and snatch it when I can. And the only downside of that is, I would say, it does sometimes make me go off on a slight tangent because I get a bit excited about a different idea. Speaking of someone who has done that in the past week and has not been working on the main project I should have been working on. In fact, I've been working on 2 other projects.
Oh,
but
amazing.
Anyway.
As someone who never has any ideas, I like that. I think that's good.
Well, unfortunately, I find that the more I work, the more ideas I get.
Okay.
So that's both good and bad. It means that I feel like when I have a period of time where I'm not working on something, I can sort of trust that the ideas will come again once I really get stuck into work again. But the massive downside is, of course, that sometimes I get distracted by new ideas and I've got to be a bit more disciplined. Yes, I've got to be a bit more disciplined about sticking to the work I'm supposed to be working on.
But I think you also need to note those ideas before they go, don't they? And I remember
that's true.
On that kind of snatching things and texting myself on the bus period, that if I didn't, I'd forget it. And that was really important all the way through the process, actually, because I get so distracted. I mean, I have a short attention span anyway, but with so much to juggle, if I didn't remember that actually on that bit I wanted to expand there, or I thought of a better way of putting that sentence, or I really wanted to use this phrase, I had to text it to myself, because otherwise it would go and it wouldn't come back. And I remember actually quite often in the night I'd wake up and go, yes, that, yes, and then I'd try and think of a way of reminding myself and just say, okay, so there's those 3 things. One is to do with the whales in the lagoons. One is to do with this. One is to do with that. And then, of course, when I woke up in the morning, I hadn't managed to. So eventually I did get into the habit of writing to myself in the night as well, because otherwise I just couldn't.
And now that we have kind of smartphones, voice noting yourself is actually also quite a good quick way of doing it. Just quickly speaking into the microphone.
I've never done that,
and then
but that
putting it
does
down.
sound like a good way, yeah.
And then probably listening back and realizing it's not helpful.
Exactly, that is a pile of rubbish.
Oh, well, it's been so lovely to talk to you about this book. It's just so stunning. I just loved, particularly because I knew some sections of it already, but particularly reading about your time in northern Alaska was so incredible. the kind of, I guess, immensity of what you did there, of going out on the ice for weeks and spending time in a whale hunting community and being really embraced by them and trusted by them, and so held and looked after by them. It was just so magnificent to read, and I would just highly recommend this book to everybody, absolutely everybody. It's beautiful, and
Thank you, Penny.
it's
really
also a
kind.
real call to arms about the climate. It's just a book about so many things. I don't know how you managed it, but you did. It's absolutely stunning.
Thank you so much.
Tell me, what have you been reading at the moment?
Right, where is it? Here it is. I have been reading a book called We Need New Names. It's by No Violet Bulawayo, who is a writer who grew up in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, and when she was 18 she moved to the US, and I haven't got all the way through it yet, but oh my god, it's so stunning from what I've read so far. So it's a story of a girl called Darling, who has been, I'm reading from the back here, uprooted from her family home by paramilitary police and is living in a shanty called Paradise. Despite the turmoil, she revels in mischief and adventures, like stealing guavas and singing, and then she goes to America. I haven't got to that bit yet, and actually I've only just got to a bit where she recalls the uprooting of her family home. But the way it's done is so much through the child's immediate experience that you are having the fun as well, and you are just inhabiting that character and loving that character so much and seeing her worldview. And it's I'm very much taken back to being young, but also learning so much. And I it's astounding. It's a brilliant book. Yeah, I'm enjoying it a lot.
Incredible. That sounds amazing. I'll put that in the show notes. So I've just read something that actually I really would like to hear what you think, Doreen. I want you to read this book. It's called Devotion by Hannah Kent, and Hannah Kent is an Australian author. Some of the listeners might have read Burial Rights, which is one of her books that did very, very well. It's such an incredible story about a community from Prussia in the I want to say it's 1830s, maybe. I could have that completely wrong. I might have the decade wrong. Where they are old Lutherans and they're being persecuted, and their religion is outlawed in Prussia, and they eventually receive permission to migrate to South Australia. And so it's about this one young woman in particular and her experiences with her family migrating to Australia. But it's so much more than that. It's a queer love story, and it's about religion and spiritualism and so many different things. And the ocean itself plays a huge role in the book. And
it
it's
sounds
also
incredible.
It's so incredible. It's just come out, and I listened on audio actually, and the audio is just incredible. I think particularly because sometimes I really love listening to a book on audio where there's a lot of different languages and different names involved, and so because all the names are German and there's quite a few German words peppered in, and then when you get to Australia there's some Indigenous language in there as well, so it's really incredible listen as well. But it's just stunning. It was absolutely stunning, and made me feel incredibly grateful to for every single modern comfort that I have as well. Right. Just I was finding myself when I was listening to it going to the tap and being like, oh, clean water.
Oh, brilliant. I'm going to listen to it too. I like the sound of that experience of hearing all those words.
Yeah, it's absolutely stunning. It's very hard to describe. It's not, I would call necessarily a traditional kind of, historical novel journey to Australia type thing. It's just, incredibly deeply beautiful love story as well. And absolutely stunning. Highly recommend it.
Wonderful. I had to practice all my Inupiaq pronunciations before doing the audio read, so I'd love to hear. Yeah, I'd love to listen to that one.
Yes, that must have taken so much practice.
Well, I'd learnt some of them while I was there, so then the difficulty was finding out the correct spelling. So a translator obviously helped me. I got in touch with an Inupiaq translator, but yeah, the words are so lovely. So I did my best to get them right.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, I was thinking when I was reading it that I might also get the audio so that I can hear what some of the words sound like. Because as a reader reading the language that I've actually never really heard,
Uh-huh.
I think it would be a really lovely experience to listen to it as well.
Well, Algevik is the bowhead whale,
Oh, is
and
it? Okay.
Algevik Luach is the grey whail.
And so, how do you pronounce the city name again that you were in?
Well, yeah, that one takes some practice. That's Utqayarvik. So the
Right.
ka is the one at the back of your throat. Utqayarvik. Utqayarvik.
Oh, well, then anyone who likes listening to audiobooks, I would highly recommend you have it on audio too. I think I might download it so I can listen to it. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, it's been really, really nice to talk to you. Thanks, Penny.
You've been listening to Not Too Busy to Write with Ali Miller and Penny Windsor.
You can buy all the books recommended on the podcast at uk.bookshop.org/shop/not too busy to write, where a portion of each sale goes to support independent bookshops around the country.
If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe or follow, and please leave a review. It really helps others to find the podcast.